Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Welcome back, everybody. It's time for our first segment of the Live from the Heartland show for December 19th. And I'm bringing on to help me out our sometimes co-host, Euan Hague. He's a professor of geography at the great University of DePaul. And he also is a good friend and a resident of Rogers Park in the 49th Ward. And our first guest is an old friend, been on this show a number of times, the one and only Jane Ramsey. She is currently the founder and president of Just Ventures, social justice consulting firm. She also teaches at University of Chicago in the School of Social Service Administration. And for many years after, including a little bit of time in the Community Relations Office for Mayor Harold Washington, she was the executive director of the Jewish Council on Urban Affairs. Good morning to you, Jane.
Good morning, Michael. Great to be here.
It was a rough week on a lot of fronts, but one of the things that really hit home in a very sad and negative way was the assassination of 15 people and the wounding of many more in Australia. And those people had gathered to celebrate Hanukkah, the first day of Hanukkah. And as a progressive and as a Jew, I'd like to hear what you might have to say about that situation.
Yeah. So of course it was tragic, horrific, frightening. I think frightening for everyone, and no matter what your faith, to have innocent people murdered by a son and a father and a son, who apparently had trained with ISIS just before was a tragedy, and it is an incident of anti-Semitism, certainly inspired by anti-Semitism, which is a centuries-old affliction, as is racism and every other form of hate, whether it's inspired by Islamophobia or racism or anti-LGBTQ sentiments. Anti-Semitism is an age-old hate. In the late 19th century, there was a document falsified by the Tsars of Russia called the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which was supposedly written by the Jewish elders talking about taking over the world. And this is a document that has been one of the documents that have fueled or fed into anti-Semitism. Henry Ford later picked it up and promoted it in his own form of anti-Semitism, as did Hitler. So anti-Semitism is sadly and frighteningly real, and has risen over the last few years. So this is something that the Jewish community is very attuned to and concerned about. Now, I do want to make a comment because since Trump has returned to office, he has exploited the concept of anti-Semitism to go after universities, to go after individuals falsely. It's also been made parallel as the just horrific war in the Middle East has happened between Israel and Gaza. People criticizing the government of Israel for its actions is not anti-Semitism. What we saw in Sydney is anti-Semitism.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Gaza and the role that's playing. I mean, there's a lot of talk these days about a rise in anti-Semitism, particularly since the October 7th, 2023 attacks on Israelis at a concert. And It just seems to have accelerated since then. And I don't hear a lot of reporting connecting Gaza to this current attack. I'm just wondering if you can make that connection. Is the rise in anti-Semitism somehow connected to the Gaza situation? Would it be happening on its own?
So I think we have to be very careful in connecting the dots. Anti-Semitism has existed, and we talked about Hanukkah. Hanukkah in the 2nd century BCE is known as the Festival of Lights, and it's a celebration that goes on for 8 days with presents for children and families. But it commemorates at that time, in the 2nd century BC, when the Jews were being forced to give up their beliefs and fought against it. So a small band of Jews led by Judah Maccabee defeated a mighty army and went to rededicate the temple and took oil to light the menorah. It was supposed to only be for 1 day, and it lasted miraculously for 8 days. And that's why Hanukkah is celebrated. So the irony of the celebration in Sydney of this festival, usually very lighthearted celebration of families with games and songs and presents. But it took a very dark turn. So anti-Semitism has been with us for a long time, but it is crucial that we not exploit it as this administration has. And I do believe that the war in the Middle East and has further fueled anti-Semitism. As a Jew, I am horrified. That's just too calm of a word by the horrific action of Netanyahu and the government, which has only fed into people's anger globally. So this has not I think that, I have talked to many friends, Jewish and non-Jewish, since this war has been going on. My fear that that Netanyahu's just awful leadership and murder of thousands of Palestinians and others in Gaza fuels anti-Semitism. I think it fuels it, but it is really important that we separate out a long-standing hardcore anti-Semitism that is fueled by many things.
I think there's a lot of factors that contribute to it. But I'm wondering, for progressive people who want to support Gaza, but also are critical of Israel, how do they do that, or how can it be done without being anti-Semitic?
It's not anti-Semitic to be opposed to Trump. It's not anti-America to be opposed by Trump.
Right on.
It's not anti-Semitic to be opposed to the actions of the government of Israel. And I and others, and whether we're Jewish or not Jewish, opposing the policies of a government that represents a Jewish state. Is still being opposed to the actions of the government. It is not anti-Semitism, and I think it's my responsibility as a Jew, to be clear on that, with anyone who is feels the importance of speaking out against the actions of Netanyahu. Now I don't even want to. We can get into the various elements of the original action against Israel by Hamas was also horrific. But the responses by the government of Israel and the ongoing justification, Netanyahu wants to stay in office, and he's being criticized in Israel as well as across the world for his, in some ways, continuing the war, apparently to avoid leaving office in part, and got a lot of internal criticism. So it's just, I would say, anyone who feels the importance of speaking out against Netanyahu's actions must. And again, that the clarity in articulating that is the clarity of what are we saying? Well, what we're saying, speaking out against the killings of innocent people and the harming and the withholding food. I mean, that's inhuman, and it's against the international law. I think that people should not be afraid or intimidated to speak out against, in their beliefs, against actions of a government in a war. That is not infusing anti-Semitism. If it crosses the line and says the Jews are doing this, the Jews are killing the people in Gaza, in Palestine, that articulation starts crossing the line to anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I think it's that line between the government of Israel and the Jews is so easily conflated when they're, that need to be very rigorously defined. I was just going to ask you, you've obviously done a lot of work here in Chicago, building coalitions and working in communities. So how does that kind of work help to counter anti-Semitism?
Well, the Jewish Council on Urban Affairs was founded in 1964 out of the civil rights movement by Rabbi Robert Marks, and I ran the JCUA from roughly 1979 to 2012. And the purpose of the organization was to understanding that anti-Semitism and racism and all forms of hate are tied together, and where there's one, there's another. And the purpose of the JCUA was to counter oppression of all people, no matter the background. And for many years since the founding, JCUA has worked in partnership with the Black and Latinx and Muslim communities and many different communities addressing issues of economic and social inequities. By acting, Rabbi Marx's belief, and there's a long analysis that goes back, which I don't know if we have time to get into, but
about 8 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, so he articulated what he called the interstitial analysis, which was the historic role of the Jews in Europe. The Jews were not allowed to have professions as everybody else. They were only, because of anti-Semitism, allowed to be the tax collector, the rent collector. So what happens what your role is in society when you are collecting taxes? The individuals you're collecting it from see you, the Jew, as being the person taking the money. They're not seeing the power above, who are the puppet, pulling the strings of the people who only have been allowed to be the tax collector and play that role. So that's what Rabbi Marx calls the interstitial analysis. His belief in founding the JCUA was one, engaging our community to do what we as human beings needed to do, which is to fight racism and all forms of hate and bigotry, in partnership with communities in Chicago and across the country. So that was the focus. But the additional underlying purpose of that work, as well as being good human beings, and doing what our religion calls for us to do and to act justly, is to also understand that when we work together, when we act together, we actually get to know people as human beings. And that it is the most powerful way of countering anti-Semitism, where we are human beings together, acting together against oppression. We build relationships. And I saw that in many different levels over my years working with grassroots community organizations in Chicago that are work together, not just dialogue, not just talking together, getting to know one, but working together to fight for affordable housing, to fight for just immigration, to fight against racism, to fight for jobs, to elect Harold Washington. That work together grew a mutual understanding. And where there were incidents of anti-Semitism over the years, among the people I saw speaking out most clearly and quickly were our allies, people who we had worked together in the Black and Latinx and other communities. So in a very real sense, I saw it played out. And I do think when we talk about fighting hate, the best antidote for it is in growing relationships, working relationships, because that's where we really come to know each other as human beings. So so the work was very much about fighting anti-Semitism, but fighting anti-Semitism through building coalition and alliance, which I think, again, is the most powerful form.
You know, we're all political animals, and we're pretty much unified in our criticism of the Trump regime. And, we hope to win some seats back and get a majority in Congress and then take the presidency in 2028. But we have a real split in the party. A lot of us it's a hard thing to work with Democrats, but we are. And for those people who are supportive of Gaza and critical of Israel, where do they stand? And that part of the Democratic Party, no matter young or old, and more traditional Democrats who are really supportive still of Netanyahu and the current Israeli government. Any take on that?
Yeah, so a majority of Jews, I think, in the country, and research is showing that the Jewish community also broadly is deeply disturbed by by the Netanyahu government's actions in Israel. I think Trump clearly has tried to use this, and in many different ways in his appeal and going after the universities, blaming anti-Semitism. That is an appeal to the Jewish community. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's working. I think it does work for people, but we have Republican Jews. I hate to say it, but we do. And they're there, and they're going to continue to be there. But I do think that our polling and our research is showing that the Jewish community is older and younger are staying with the Democrats. And this is, again, when we look over the years, even when there have been other things that have happened, the Jewish community, by and large, of most white constituents, of it's predominantly a white constituent, votes more Democrat than every other predominantly white constituent.
We grew up on a real unity of the Jewish community with the Black community and fighting for civil rights. Jane Ramsey, you do great work. Glad to have you as a neighbor and a friend, and we'll have you back on because there's a lot of issues that you have insight and knowledge about, and I know you'd love to share them, and we'd love to have you.
Well, I just love what you guys are doing. Thank you, Michael, for giving me the opportunity.
Okay.